the second of the monthly Brown Bag series. Kathy Fraser today is going to talk about field study that Ohana did, but since we're still in the meet everybody else in the community, we're going to do the quick round the room name thing. So AJ Brush, MSR.
Andy Jacobs, Community Technologies Developer.
Joshua Goodman, I'm a researcher in the email and spam sub-team of the Machine Learning and Applied Statistics group.
Wow.
10 times fast, right now.
I'm Scott Smithman, I'm a program manager on the Ohana team, just really joined.
I'm Roger Gerwolf from the Mac Booth.
Just my hands lead PM and Exchange. Hans Bjordahl, Outlook Calendar guy.
And hi to those of you watching online. Feel free to send me an email during the presentation if you'd like to ask questions in the moment.
Are you going to say what Ohana is? Because maybe I'm already supposed to know that, but
I was going to ask and see how many people wanted me to just give a description of it, because I'm not sure. There's been various assorted, I think, presentations and whichever about Ohana, but I wasn't sure how many people know what Ohana is. Hi, I'm Kathy Fraser, user researcher for Ohana. How many people in this room would like to have a quick overview of what Ohana is? You guys? Yeah, may as well?
just like 30 seconds.
Sure. Ohana is a brand new V1 consumer product around to help families become organized and in touch with each other. It's also intended to be the platform for consumer products going forward, and that other products will plug into Ohana as it relates to family activities and family organization. So we're still in our early planning phases, so there's a lot of specifics TBD, but that is generally what Ohana is about. If you guys have specific questions about that while we're going through this presentation, then feel free to ask. And since we're a pretty small group, feel free to chime in at any time with any other questions anyhow. So, we can do this as an interactive discussion.
And at least one person sent me an email saying they're watching.
All right, that's good. So generally, what I'm going to talk to you guys about today is a most recent set of studies I've done. I did another set of studies for the same project earlier, but I'm going to talk to you about the one that we did most recently because it's most related to calendaring, which this group is mostly about. We did interviews with 8 families in the Redmond area. In the Western Washington area, we went relatively far afield from Redmond. We looked at calendaring in the family, not just as an effect of the wall calendar on the kitchen, but as everybody in the family's management of their time. We talk to the parents and the children within the family. And I'm not going to read every single one of these bullet points because we'll talk about them more specifically as we go through the presentation. So again, this was 8 different families, and while we were doing this, we went out to their homes and we interviewed them, or I interviewed them. And one important aspect to note about this particular study is that we interviewed everybody in the family. A lot of times the calendaring and family research has been, focusing on one of the parents or maybe only the parents. We interviewed both parents. We made sure that they were going to be there, other than the cases where there was only one parent. And we interviewed the children as applicable as well. So unless the children were too young to be involved in any way, we interviewed the children also. So we were looking at the whole family experience of their time management systems, as well as other areas that are not so related to this group. The particular study that I'm going to describe here, we had a pretty broad spectrum of family demographics. We had families that were very low poverty all the way up to, very affluent families with both parents working and things like that. So we had a pretty good cross-section of different families. Just to again scope the information that I'm going to be telling you guys about here. Again, this is a pretty broad field study, and I'm kind of sliced the information here for the most part to be the information that's most applicable to this group. So there was other information collected in the study that I'm not going to present here. If you have any questions about something that I'm kind of teasing at in here, please feel free to ask because there's a lot more information and I'm sharing with you here directly. The first section, there's kind of 2 sections to this slide deck. The first is about family dynamics, and we're looking again at how the family members interacted with each other, how that family kind of system itself impacted their use of time management. And the second section will be more explicitly on exactly the specific time management tools that they use, what do they do with them, how do they write on them, how do they view them, things of that nature. So there's 2 sections to this presentation. Overall in family dynamics, one thing we really noticed that I sort of alluded to earlier was that family calendaring is more than just that beautiful, one with a nice picture on the wall and, that mom writes on and whichever. It's been really easy for us overall in research to focus on that as being the family calendar because it's very easy. It's visible, it's right there, and, it's easy to kind of latch right onto and say that is the family calendar. But one of the things that came out of this study is that generally there are many calendars and different family members have their own calendar. Just because that one on the wall is the one that's easiest for us to view does not even mean it's necessarily the primary calendar in the family. There's any number of different calendars. So wanting to look broadly at time management and how do people, individuals in the family do their time management. Typically it is the person who is at home most often, which is most commonly the mother, who owns that kitchen wall calendar, which I think has led us to the artifacts that mothers own the calendar, which I think is true in some ways, but not in others, but I'll describe that more in a minute. But every individual, like the other parent, usually has at least one calendar of their own. Sometimes there'll be more than one. Sometimes there'll be a beautiful graphic one over here, and there'll be a whiteboard one over here, and there's a number of different family calendars kind of sprinkled throughout the home. There's often one by the computer. There are a number of different forms and places for calendars. So we want to kind of open up our thinking a little bit and not just think about family calendaring as being that calendar on the wall. Mm-hmm.
Quick question.
Sure.
Did any of this touch on kids' school planners? Did it hit any of them?
Yes. Yep, we did look at some of them. Indeed. Looking at across all the different calendars that are around, again, they tend to meet kind of different needs, and there are different specializations. Like each of the parents will own different kinds of calendars. This parent owns the doctor's appointments calendars or the regular time-based appointments calendars. This parent might own the sports events calendars or the sport event kinds of things, or this parent might own, the Cub Scout stuff or whatever. There's different areas of specialization. So again, there's not necessarily just one owner of the calendar. Each of the people in the family have their own kind of areas of specialization and areas that they might own. Some families have calendars that are explicitly just for the purpose of being shared. I have my own calendar that is really important to me, and I also have a calendar that is expressly just to be shared with others, just as a way of kind of communicating with others about what is going on and things they might want to know about, which I thought was an interesting sort of a dynamic that the families, would have distinct split purposes like that, and it was seen as a big enough need that they went through the effort of creating and maintaining these two calendars. To my second major bullet point there. When I was talking to families about their pain points with calendaring, most often it was not the person who was kind of the primary calendar owner, the person who tended to own that calendar on the wall or whatever, that expressed pain with their system. They tended to have a lot more invested in that system and feel like, it worked for them. Hey, yeah, I can see right there, I know what's going on. And, they had their own whatever other parts and bits of the system that they had created, and it was them. It was most commonly the non-dominant partner that really expressed a lot of verbal pain about their calendaring. I'm having a hard time keeping in sync with their calendar. I don't know what's going on. And the feelings of being out of sync or feeling like the calendar system didn't really meet their needs was more prevalent in the non-dominant calendar partner, which is something I think that, again, we want to keep in mind when we're thinking about family calendaring, because we've tended to latch onto the dominant partner as being the important one. But in some ways, as an entry point for creating new products, it's the non-dominant partner that's more likely to have more unmet needs that we can think about. The dominant partners commonly expressed pain with mobility, because a lot of these calendars were paper-based, and even ones that had tried to use technology-based calendars, they had problems around mobility and accessing information when they were in a variety of locations in and out of the home and when they're out and about. Communication. Communication is a key thing. Families do a lot of it, which is good, I think, for the most part. They talk in a lot of different ways, though phone is really the most common way of communicating throughout the day. It was interesting when I talked to the family members about communication and the purpose of why they were communicating with each other, and their first initial verbal expression about why they communicated was time-based things. I want to know, are we free this Saturday? I want to know if it's okay if we do this, tonight, and I want to let them know I'm running late. So the expressed purpose of most of the reasons that they talked with each other was primarily about calendaring items. But once we talked about it more deeply, it turned out that in actuality, a lot of the communication wasn't, they knew what they were doing that Saturday. The question was more about, is it okay? It's the sort of bonding aspect of, and kind of confirmation of, like at Outlook, you can send a meeting request and people will send back new times and whatever. That's very formal. That isn't really the purpose of what they're doing. The purpose of what they're doing is suggesting something to the other and kind of using it as a way to bond with each other and say, is it okay if we do this? Is it all right with you? And it's expressing their relationship and supporting their relationship and the dynamics there, as well as getting at the more subtle time-based issues around, are you feeling too busy? Is there something else you want to be doing instead, or that you just haven't expressed, and whichever. So the communication was a complex kind of thing. It wasn't just the passing of information, even though that was the expressed purpose of why they called each other. It wasn't only that. It was a great deal about fostering the relationships and fostering bonding and communication with their partners and with the kids. The kids would call their parents, and the parents want to know, what are my kids up to? They want to just have that feeling of knowing what they're doing right now, feeling kind of dynamically connected with them. So the emotional aspects of the communication were really critical, even though they were also about calendar items. Family goals. This came out a lot when talking to families about how they planned their time. Families expressed a lot of unmet needs for planning their time. I wish we could spend more time together on the weekends. We seem to get so busy running these errands. I want to spend more quality time with my family. I want to make sure that I spend at least this much time every day, just sitting down and connecting with my kids. I want to spend this much time every day, on meeting these religious goals. I want to, set, they had expressed goals and things that they wanted to be able to do. They wanted to be able to kind of balance the intangible as well as the tangible time, and making sure that they were spending their time in ways that met with their personal values and goals. Even families wanted to feel more in control of this. They wanted to feel more. They felt too much like they were kind of knee-jerk reaction, being responsive to input to them rather than really being able to plan these things and really being able to manage their time in ways that felt good to them. The parenting goal to parents wanted to make sure they were spending enough time parenting their kids, wanting to make sure that they were spending enough time with them. And as the kids were getting older, particularly for young teenagers and older teenagers, helping their kids learn how to manage their time. It was a goal of theirs that I can work with my kid and help support them as they are becoming more independent in their time management. So I want to be able to see what they're doing, and I want to be able to kind of control what they're doing, but I also want to give them kind of their own wings or their own kind of safe area to start, managing their time and enabling them to plan their own after-school, meetings or whichever activities, but still being able to kind of keep an eye on them and kind of coach them as they were going through their own learning about time management. So that was a particular goal. And for the last point there, right now there just aren't a lot of ways for parents to do this kind of stuff. They kind of seem to throw up their hands about it. It's like, well, I'd like to be able to do this, but I don't know how. And I'd like to be able to, have better ways of integrating my goals and my values into how I spend my time, but I don't see a way to do it. So it was really, it's kind of sad in a way that they were expressing this kind of need and not having the ability to really manage their time as they would like. Families are not homogeneous. And this is kind of obvious, but it's also kind of important to keep in mind in that when we're thinking about families and family calendaring or whatever, we tend to think of it as a unit. Here is the family, father, mother, kids. But in actuality, families tend to vary quite a lot within the family members about their own personalities, about their work styles, about their organization, about how much free time they have. There's a lot of variation, and it's an interesting thing that came out while talking to the families. They often have kind of complementary ways of doing things. One parent is the organizer, the other parent is the spontaneous one, and they tend to really have complementary ways of doing things, and that can often lead to tension around planning things and or deciding upon a way of doing something. The families tended to have some tension around people's styles there. And I'll go into a little more specifics of some of these differences, but that was something that came up again and again. Family calendar activities. And this is related to what I said earlier, in that there's more than one calendar on that people have. The interesting point, too, when I was thinking about the different kinds of calendars that people have and looking at what each of those kinds of calendars represent. Usually, people will have a personal calendar. This is my calendar. They may also have a shared calendar. And they may also have calendars that are relevant to specific kinds of information. I've got my sports events calendar. I've got my school events calendar. I've got, my Cub Scouts events calendar or whichever they had. They would also have separate types of calendars. And they didn't necessarily see that as a pain point. It wasn't necessarily something that they were complaining about a lot, even though it was sometimes hard for them to schedule things because they didn't, the things weren't reflected on one consolidated calendar. They wouldn't necessarily verbally complain about it a lot, but so it was meeting some needs for them to have these separate calendars and have separate ways of doing things. But they also, it was also problematic. But it's interesting to look at what is represented by each of those kinds of calendars and how this is useful to the family to be able to separate them out in these different types, but still have a way of having them meet. I alluded a little bit to this earlier as well, but calendars are all over the place in the home, but there tends to be kind of hubs, and generally they are in proximity to a communication tool. Most commonly, the main hub for a family is in their kitchen or family room, somewhere in that area, and it's next to the phone. And this is where it's also a sort of activity hub for the family. I walk into the house, I set the papers down here on this counter, and this is where the stuff all goes. This is my dumping spot. But it also, it tends to contain a lot of information, as well as containing a communication port, usually phone, for that particular one. And people use that as a way of kind of organizing themselves because that information is useful to them when they're doing communication about things, and having the information there and kind of all synthesizing it together is important and valuable to them. Other places that people tend to have a calendar or scheduling hub is by the computer. That's the most common secondary place for people to organize that sort of stuff. And sometimes people will have paper calendars there by the computer also. Sometimes they will have other types of information there by the calendar. So even if they are using an electronic calendar on the computer, they will still have other kinds of information nestled in that area as well. It's another sort of a distinct hub. Sometimes people move around within their home while they're doing this. I had several parents expressly comment that they liked to they would take down their paper calendar and move it around the house, or if they had a day planner that they would go to other places in the house to do this because they either didn't want the other people who were already in that communal space to hear what they were doing, because it was too busy or noisy, the kids were running around and playing and they wanted to go someplace more private, or because there was a piece of information someplace else in the house that they wanted to be able to access or view at the same time that they were doing this calendaring. So doing things in a flexible fashion and doing them in a mobile fashion was very important to them. The other notes there are about Ohana. The information that's on the calendars. There was quite a bit of variety in the kinds of things that people would bother to put on their calendars. Some people would only put time-based things, doctor's appointments or specific activities at a given time. They would, if it didn't have a time associated with it, they wouldn't write it down. Other people would write all kinds of things on there, like, oh, I need to go shopping at this time, or, oh, this is 1 week from some other activity, or some people wrote down TV programs that they wanted to watch. Some people wrote down, bills that were due. Some people did not. There was quite a lot of variation in how people use their calendars as ways of organizing their time and organizing what they wanted to be doing. It tended to be a kind of a tension between what they had on their calendar and what they had someplace else. In their to-do lists or in their stacks of Post-it notes or whichever, there tended to be things. Some people had things more heavily reflected here and not here. Some people had things more reflected in lists and not calendars, and different kinds of balances for how they did that. And some people just weren't very organized. They didn't tend to they kept everything in their head rather than on paper activities. And the people who didn't write things down tended to be the ones who expressed the most pain around forgetting things. They were more likely than other people to say, oh yeah, and I forget stuff all the time. So that was, it seemed like they just keeping things in your head was not really a very successful strategy, though people tended to like using it a lot. It's one of those things. Now the second point here being that people tend to fall into patterns with what they do. kids in particular, and parents as well, often keep track of what's going on today is Tuesday. What's going on Tuesday? The kid has this after-school activity. They have that after, they have that regular thing in the evening, and you know what you're supposed to be doing by the day of the week. Sometimes they wouldn't even reflect those things on their calendar systems because they would just know this. That was problematic, however, because particularly when they're doing later planning for something that's happening a couple months out, they're more likely to forget about that and say, oh, that's right, after you've already planned it, it'll come up later and say, oh, wait, but we have something going on Tuesday, I can't make that time, and not realize it until they were actually closer to the event. So people didn't want to take the hassle of actually rewriting things down on their regular calendars or even on their technology calendars, putting in recurring appointments always. But it tended to bite them later. It worked pretty well in the short term, but it didn't work so well in the long term as far as planning what was going to happen. But I thought the whole day association was interesting as well. The concrete patterns of what was going on were really important to them. And like with step families too, there was a pattern of the every other week, the every other weekend kind of thing. I know they were here this weekend, they won't be there this weekend, that kind of a thing. So again, patterns in their activities and what they were doing were really key to them. To the last point there, people didn't often go to their paper calendars and have changes reflected there. When something changed, they would just remember it. They would not bother to go to the calendar and scratch it out and change the time on it, unless it was something that was happening well in the future or a really super critical event. Mostly they would just remember that. It was a little bit unclear whether this was due to the way that they couldn't really do it on the fly because their calendar was most likely at home and wasn't wasn't necessarily with them when the changes were recognized, or whether it was because they just didn't see the calendar as being something that was that dynamic and living. That's kind of the static, paper version. Yeah, whatever. The real version is what's going on in my head. That's the dynamic, real, living version is what's going on in my head. And that was kind of the gut reason that I got for why people didn't do a lot of this as well, was that the calendar is something I check in the morning, and when I'm doing then I remember what I'm going to do that day, and all the changes and whichever are just reflected in my head. I don't bother to go and change it. So changes were an interesting point as well. How people write on the calendar was really interesting. People had this kind of goal in mind. When they would get a new calendar, they would go through and you populate all the birthdays and you populate all the annual events and all the holidays, and maybe you put in the last day of school and whichever you kind of go through the whole year and try and do this. And while they're doing that, they tend to kind of have some sort of system. Maybe they circle days off of school, or maybe they put stars for birthdays or whatever. And they write it at the top of the little squares for each day. They tend to write at the top of the day. And then they all said, and I really try, when I'm writing other things on each of those little squares for the day, I try and write morning things in top part, and afternoon things in the middle, and evening things in the evening. But either I forget, or I write too big, or it fills up too fast, and it all quickly starts going down the drain, and they just write things wherever they can on the calendar. They have this kind of goal in mind. They want to be able to have it more structured, but just due to size constraints and whichever else, that whole goal tended to kind of get washed away in the flurry of writing things down. People, again, tended to write things in different sorts of ways. The interesting thing here, too, being that, we would all expect that holidays and birthdays and things like that are expressed, in kind of emphatic ways, with a colored marker, again, with stars or smiley faces or whatever. And that was kind of true. But the things that were really expressed in a great deal of highlighting and underlining and everything else were the important days. And the difference there being that something can be important even if it's not really a calendar activity. Like one father, for example, was being threatened with being laid off at work. And it wasn't really a calendar event, there wasn't really a time-based sort of thing with it. He didn't have to do a lot, to prepare for it, whatever. But man, that day was bright red, big stars and big circles and everything on that calendar, let me tell you. And, it was the personal importance. It was kind of an expression of a stage in his life that was ending. He didn't end up getting laid. He wasn't ending up getting laid off, but nonetheless, it was still there as a reflection of that kind of importance to him. It was about how important this event is to me, and that happens throughout a lot of other items that I saw on people's calendars about the ways that they express things. It was more about how much is this really important and valuable to me? How much do I really care about this event, rather than the kind of official importance. The other interesting point about the importance aspect was that things that had a lot of associated activities or a lot of things that needed to be done to prepare for an event weren't necessarily highlighted very strongly. Like in one family, they were having a yard sale that weekend. And man, there's a lot of stuff you got to do to get ready for a yard sale, and that's a pretty big event. But you know, it was just written in relatively small letters, and it wasn't really reflected on the calendar in that sense. And what happened in that case was that, again, in that balance between calendar and lists, is she had lots and lots of lists about the yard sale, but it wasn't on the calendar in a very distinct manner at all. It was just kind of, yeah, yard sale on Saturday. But she had like 5 lists about different kinds of things that she needed to do to get ready for it. So the kind of balance there about where things were reflected was interesting. If it's something to do, if it's to-do items, it was more likely to be reflected in papers rather than on the calendar itself, which was interesting, I thought. People had a goal in mind about expressing different items on the calendar per people. You know, like they would try and write their names of the person, or in one family they used different colors to indicate different items on the calendar as being important to one person or another. But they didn't necessarily follow through with it very concretely. I think that was because they couldn't find a really good pattern, because often more than one person is involved in a specific event, or maybe, you know, you have to take child A with you to child B's practice because you're on the way to dropping child A off to something else as well, and the who's involved sort of thing starts getting pretty muddied pretty quickly. And but they expressed kind of a desire to be able to do that, but really didn't seem to be able to find a good way to easily capture that kind of information on their calendars. As we might expect, people do lots of drawing on their calendars with kind of personal shapes and colors and whichever to indicate importance. I'm kind of breezing through all this. You guys are kind of just looking at me. If you have anything else you want to say anytime, just let me know. Viewing calendars. People, when we talked about different kinds of calendars, people expressed a lot of interest and a value in being able to just see my calendar. I don't want to have to walk up to my calendar and turn it on. That's one of the barriers to technology. I don't want to have to go up there and turn on my calendar. I want it to just be there. I want to be able to be on the other side of the room and just kind of squint over at it and see, is there anything this weekend? Is there any kind of squiggles or whatever on that day on the calendar? If there is, then I'll go over and look. But if there isn't, then I'll just stay here and say, no, I'm free on Saturday. So they wanted to be able to just view it immediately and easily from any distance and at any location. And they would repeatedly comment about that as being a limitation to current technology calendars, as if they couldn't do that. It was a problematic thing. And as in the number of times that they view their calendars, some people look at their calendar repeatedly throughout the day. But they weren't in the majority. There was only a couple of them. More people tended to either look at their calendar the evening before and or the morning of, and kind of just keep a day or maybe 2 days in their head, kind of on a rotating basis. You know, I know what I'm doing today. And maybe I know more or less what I'm doing tomorrow. And they would kind of just keep that in their heads as they're going through. Some people would want to view things for farther out. Some people wanted to be able to view things pretty close by. I only want to be able to see what I'm doing today or tomorrow, or I want to be able to see what I'm doing for the whole week, or I want to be able to see things for the whole couple months. So that varied from kind of person to person and from their organizational style. One of the challenges that people expressed about viewing their calendars were that calendars flip based on the week, Sunday through Saturday or Monday through Sunday or whatever, and the month. You know, the last day of this month you have to start turning the page to view the next month, and it's a pain. And you know, they aren't necessarily thinking of it as, when they say week, they don't mean Sunday through Saturday. They mean 7 days from now. They mean I want to be able to see what I'm doing in this next 7 days, or maybe what I'm doing now through the weekend. But not something that breaks, particularly in the middle of a weekend. You know, being able to see Saturday but not Sunday is frustrating. And if it's the end of this month and having to flip pages back and forth all the time to view the next month is a pain. And they expressed annoyance with that and desire to be able to see things in a more flexible, kind of time-based manner. Huh?
Is there did anybody have any system that looks different? One of the challenges, obviously, on a calendar is you can have a scrolling calendar, but then people lose track where they are and we're oriented around that Sunday to Saturday view.
I didn't look at it in this particular study, but in the study that I did for Ohana last winter, I just showed them some knockups that had different sort of calendar layouts on it and whichever. And the feedback that I got from people at that point was that They liked kind of the more rotating sort of style and the kind of more unique style as well, as long as it also had an anchor on it for like the current month and for where am I today in this month. So they wanted to have some sort of a way of anchoring themselves as to, or orienting themselves toward where am I right now. And then they were more receptive to kind of flexible calendaring in the main view, as long as they also had a way of knowing where am I in this month in that kind of traditional sense. Yeah. Exactly. And then some of the Ohana mock-ups that we showed them earlier too, people showed a fair amount of willingness to view calendars in different styles, but not too much. They tended to anchor on the Outlook way of doing things. The Outlook is pervasive enough that many people recognize the Outlook style, and that, okay, this is the way calendars usually look. And they wanted to see that in some ways, but so they were willing to take some differences, like in one of the mock-ups that I showed them, the day was done horizontally rather than vertically. And most of the people liked it, and they felt that they were comfortable with that. It was fine for them to do the different orientation, but it wasn't okay to have too many other new shapes and colors and whichever involved also. Right, yeah. So, but they were willing. And a lot of people didn't even really notice it until, as I was showing them the different mock-ups, and I showed them the one with the vertical calendar. They didn't even really comment on it until after I had shown them a whole set and I asked them to choose their favorite. They were like, oh wow, looking at this one now, I just realized that one has switched, and I didn't even really realize it while I was looking at it. So, if it's subtle enough from whichever, they were totally open to it. They aren't so determined and used to having it one way that they aren't willing to accept any changes. So that was interesting. Onwards. Kids. Kids are particularly inclined to having the viewpoint, kind of like we mentioned earlier about the day of the week. What day is it? Okay, this Wednesday. I always do this on Wednesday. And they're really likely to anchor on the day of the week. As they get older, they're more flexible about that, but nonetheless, they're particularly inclined to do that kind of stuff. Usually, kids don't have a calendar unless they're forced to by their school. Schools will, especially middle schools, and seem to these days be inclined to giving kids planners that they're supposed to use, and the kids use them only because their teachers make them, and they stop using them as soon as they can. The kids that had those that I've talked to about it specifically were like, yeah, it's okay, but they certainly weren't exactly excited about using it. They kind of recognized that it was useful, but they weren't self-motivated enough to bother to do so. Part of this, I think, was that there's so many safety nets in place for kids that we don't really rely on them to know their own schedule. Most parents remind their kids several times about, today, honey, don't forget you have to do this, and okay, now tomorrow you're going to have to do this, get ready. We spend a lot of time as parents, telling our kids what they need to be doing, so why should they have their own? Older kids are more reluctant to even listen to their parents, right? I'm going to remember my own stuff, and I don't need any one of your calendar things. I'm just going to know. But the older kids also tend to be more independent and more spontaneous in their planning. They come home from school, call my friend, see if he's home, go there. They don't do a lot of planning. They're doing it much more spontaneously, as in, what's available right now? What do I feel like doing? How much homework do I have? Okay, I'm going to go do this. What's the weather like? All right, we'll go skateboarding. So they don't do a lot of planning. They're kind of resistant to that whole thing of planning is boring. And so they're really not very interested in doing it. That said, a lot of and again, they also get a lot of reminders from their parents and teachers about things that are really important. That said, a lot of the parents expressed a lot of interest in helping their kids learn more about being independent, and they also expressed that if a system for real family calendaring was going to be successful, it needed to include the kids, that the kids needed to be using the system, and that they really wanted the kids to be part of the system as well. And also, I think it's definitely one of those challenges around family calendaring is how to involve the kids and how to inspire them to become involved. One of the things that Ohana is working on is around chores and things like that, and tracking of chores and helping parents, assign things to the kids and track whether or not they're done and whichever. So that's one potential way, but there's certainly some more opportunities there around how to get kids more involved in calendaring. So plenty of places for people to do some more good thinking. Reminders, kind of as we were just alluding to, reminders were really important to people. I was kind of surprised with how vehemently people were really in love with their reminders. A couple of people that in the study this most recent set of visits that I did, were being forced at work to use Lotus Notes against their will because they felt like Lotus Notes didn't have as good of reminders or the kind of reminders they wanted. They wanted Outlook reminders. And they were really annoyed that they had just the biggest difference. The only reason they complained about having to use Lotus Notes was reminders. That was, they liked the Outlook reminders. That was really important to them. They used them for personal and, even on their work calendar, they would use it for personal and business-related things, and reminders were really, really important to them. It was the only salient difference to some of these people about Notes versus Outlook was reminders. It was really important to them. One woman, for example, had 2 PDAs that she carried around with her. She was one of the other people that we had that used PDAs at all, but she had 2 PDAs that she carried around with her. She had her old one that she'd been using for quite a while, and she had her new one that she wanted to use, and she thought was better. But she had a lot of reminders set up in her old one, so she couldn't get rid of it because it was too much of a hassle to set up the new reminders in her new PDA, and so she carried this other one around just so that it would ping her for her reminders for these different events. It was so that important to her that she was willing to carry around the spare device just because of getting these reminders. And reminders for each other and reminders for yourself were almost equally important. Being able to remind other people about stuff that was going on was very critical as well. Sometimes, again, like this woman with the PDA, and sometimes other people would, parents in particular, would set themselves reminders to remind the kids about this. And remember this, remind my spouse about that. And they would use different sorts of reminders.
So since they're paper-based, what kinds of reminders were they relying on?
In that case, she carried her PDA around with her all the time, and so she had like a sound-based reminder, I believe, on their PDA. I think there were actually different reminders on either one of the devices, just based on the device's capabilities. Most commonly, the kind of reminders that people would use, they wouldn't like send themselves emails and stuff. They would just use, simple, relatively simple reminders. They weren't doing anything super fancy with them. The most common actual way of doing reminders was via paper. That I would give myself a paper. And a couple of husbands did this, and I hadn't seen this before, so it was new to me, but apparently several of the Ohana team members do this too. But they would leave sticky notes for themselves on their wallet. And this is very common. That sort of form of reminders is relatively common. Putting a piece of paper in a place where you know you're going to have to go to on your way to doing something else. The kitchen counter, leaving sticky notes on the kitchen counter was another form of a reminder. I'm going to put this here so my teenagers, when they get home, they always go to the kitchen. They're always going to get food, so they're going to look here. So they would post reminders for them on the kitchen counter. They would repost them wherever. They would leave notes for the kids in the morning on their backpacks, right? You put them wherever you think the person is going to be going, or you put them for yourself wherever you're going to need to go, in your purse, and on your wallet, whatever, on your car keys. The reminders would be placed in a location that was part of a transition activity or whichever, something that they knew they were going to need to be seen. So papers are really the most common form of reminders that we saw, though the electronic reminders were definitely important for people as well. But people spent a lot of time doing this. It was an ongoing activity in a lot of ways. And verbal reminders were ongoing. But again, often the parents would have to do something to remind themselves to verbally remind their kids. Oh, the location also was related, the location of the reminder was also related to the importance. Something that's really important gets put in a much more salient place. Something that's not so important gets placed at a somewhat less important place. The really important things get placed on like in one family, it was on the door. They have to see this on the door, on the way, to opening the door. They have to see it, so it's right there. Less important things get placed over here, next to the computer. Well, maybe they'll see it after they've done their chores, and they'll come and sit down at the computer, and maybe then they'll see it. So they would have a distinct system of where they would place the thing, dependent on how important it was that the person see it, and how important it was for them to be reacting to it immediately. You're looking confused?
Well, I'm looking skeptical, just because everything you're saying makes me think that for most families, especially ones that don't have a computer located in a really good location, we keep ours in the kitchen family room area because that's what family are. But for anybody who doesn't do that, all this is making me think that Ohana's going to have a tough time, right? If the way people need reminders done is to have it someplace where they have to see it, and if most people don't have a computer or doing that for them,
I'm not skeptical about the results because this is making me
Well, I think what that's really calling out to me is that Ohana needs to, there's a couple things about that. Ohana needs to have devices that make it so that it's not tethered to the PC. That it needs to make sure that it's not only something that people have to go to the PC to see it, whatever. It needs to support things like sounds and like, color changes or whatever to indicate something like that.
Not just software, but separate devices.
Yeah, and that's part of the plan for Ohana, that it's not just there is hardware associated with Ohana. The other part of that really calls out to me as well is that Ohana, like I mentioned earlier itself, there's activity hubs in the home, but the Ohana itself needs to become an activity hub in the home. That if people go to Ohana more often, if it becomes kind of a place where everybody just kind of automatically checks when they get home and they automatically check the Ohana device on the kitchen counter, and that's just kind of their automatic way of doing things, then that gains more power for using the system for that kind of things as well. So if Ohana itself becomes such a great hub of information and communication that it becomes a hub in and of itself, then that helps build the strength for the whole system. It's kind of the virtuous circle thing going again. And I think it's really going to be key for the overall adoption. So I would agree. It's definitely a challenge, and I think that it's something the team needs to really be focusing on. Any other thoughts about that? Okay. Oh, on the last bullet point here is something that the team members have kind of talked about on a couple of occasions for Ohana, which is the audio note to self. Calling yourself to remind yourself of something, and of something you need to do when you get home or when you get to work or whichever. There was a couple of people who had done this when I specifically asked people in the study if they had done this before. A couple of people said, well, yeah, I've done that once or twice. And they would look really embarrassed, and they get kind of shy, and they kind of be ducking their head like, oh, gosh, yeah, I have. But they didn't want to do it very often, but they were really embarrassed about it. And I think there's some people who are really into the kind of the audio technology thing, and they're figuring that that'll be a great way of kind of going from audio to technology and having kind of a direct relation there and whichever. But people seem to be really embarrassed about the whole thing, and I wasn't getting the impression that it was something people wanted to do more of. So I think that the voice to text sort of a thing was probably going to be a challenging one to get people excited about. Mobility. Again, people have a lot of pain around this getting out and about and accessing information when they're out and about. A lot of people had pieces of paper expressly kept just for writing themselves notes while they were out. Like they keep pieces of paper in their car, in their purse, somewhere else, and they would use the whole purpose of having these scraps of paper, pieces of paper, was to be able to write themselves notes about things they needed to remember to put into their system when they got home, or when they got to wherever at work or wherever their system happened to be. So it was expressly just to kind of band-aid this, I can't access my system when I'm out of the house, and I'm going to put myself little notes here as a band-aid until I can actually get to my system and put them in there then. I was surprised at the prevalence of people's use of little scraps of paper for this, but I think it indicates, again, more about the need for people to be able to directly use the system when they're out and about. Again, the transferring of this information about things that are not directly inputted into the system was problematic for people. People would forget. They would lose little scraps of paper, or they would just forget that, oh yeah, I didn't write it down, and I just told somebody that we would meet tomorrow at 4 o'clock for coffee, and I just forgot. And those kind of band-aidy kinds of things weren't always working all that well. There was a couple people who had a very distinct system in place around their little scraps of paper that they tried to make this band-aid system work better for them. Like one mother, she had her diaper bag, and she would put the notes in one place in her diaper bag if it was really had to be put in right away, or if it was relating to one topic, and she'd put them into another place in her diaper bag if it was relating to something else. And she kind of had created this whole little system around her band-aids, or her little scraps of paper, and what she did with them, and whatever it was. Interesting how much effort she had put into creating this. And yeah, people really wanted a better way to resolve this problem. They were pretty open to the use of technology at this point. They were pretty interested in, PDAs are really cool. I think I'll talk about that in a minute, but PDAs are really cool. They just haven't worked very well for me, but I'll go more into that in a second. Strengths and weaknesses of the paper systems that people used. From the people's perception, the biggest strength of paper was it was easy to use and view. You didn't have to turn it on. You can see it from anywhere. You don't have to learn how to use it. It's easy. And it's also flexible. I can draw my little squiggly notes. I can read in my red pen. I can tell by whose handwriting, who wrote this on the calendar. They like the flexibility of that as well. Weaknesses, I mean, of the paper system, people didn't feel like paper system was perfect, however. They were certainly well able to come up with things that they didn't like about their paper system. There wasn't this sort of holy grail of paper is the way to do everything. People were pretty open about things that they didn't like about it. Limited space. Again, it was too hard to find enough space on each day to write things down. It's hard to carry. This wasn't the third one here. It was an interesting point as well about no backup of information in the system. That several people were worried that, if something goes wrong or whatever, or if something happens, I don't have a way of backing this up. The information will be gone. If I spill coffee on this and it's lost, or something happens to it, it's gone. They would like to have a technology system that would help overcome that. The hard to share, again, we talked about that earlier, the need to duplicate information between systems, and lack of reminders. Those were all aspects that people really didn't like about paper. Technology. Most people tried to use technology. They liked the idea about using technology, but it was just too hard. Several people had tried PDAs. One family had used one for about 1 year, and then the warranty ran out, and the machine promptly died. And another family, had one, and it turned out that it didn't integrate with Outlook the way they wanted it to, and so they ended up just tossing it. And they would get one, or somebody else got one, and it was just too hard to use. The little buttons were too much of a pain, and so they didn't use it either. The number of people who had tried PDAs and given up on them was kind of surprising. People really wanted to. They kind of had this sort of expressed wish that, man, I wish there was some way that I could use PDA, and I really like the idea about PDAs, but they've been too hard. And it's just not working for me.
Isn't that common in the whole industry, though? I mean, I certainly only have research on this, but I've perceived that there's been a big drop-off in PDA use and PDA adoption, and lots of people are like, let's try this. And
yeah, I'm not sure. I haven't really been all that up to date in the PDA adoptions, but I wouldn't be surprised about that at all. It seems like there's a lot of lost opportunity there.
Was there any correlation between people who had PDAs and had gone to laptops, who had been on desktops in their offices and moved over to laptops, or,
No, it seemed to be pretty independent. The people who were still using PDAs were being forced to by their work for the most part. There was a couple of companies apparently who are trying to get their workers away from being at their desktop all the time or whichever, being tied to a desktop, and so they give them PDAs and say, here, use this. And so they did. And there was a certain amount of that, but it wasn't necessarily seen as a replacement for the computer for most people. It was a way of checking my email was the biggest value there.
And what's the kind of information that they want when they're out? Do they want to be able to input dates and calendar items as well as get them out?
Yes, sir.
Hence why spot watch, that concept.
Yeah, they expected that it would be fully connected, that the goal in mind was not that it was just a kind of a thing that I have to go over here and then sync. The goal was that I have this portable device that is constantly via, my cell phone is connected, my PDA better be connected, and it better be current. And the expectation was that if I'm going to play, it should be as connectable and connected as their cell phone. And it was the most common sort of analogy drawn there.
Oh, yeah, being connected but then putting data are two different things.
Right. No, but yeah, people expected to be able to use it on an ongoing basis. They can use their cell phone for text messaging or making calls and whichever. That it's both directions.
And was there a model that they liked for data input on anything?
We didn't get quite that specific. I mean, in this case, we showed them a couple of mock-ups in the other research and whichever, and people liked handwriting. I think I mentioned that in a minute, but people really liked handwriting sorts of forms, but they didn't necessarily expect that for the mobile devices because I think they were kind of just grounding their expectations on smartphones and PDAs. They kind of expected to have that sort of form factor, but we didn't do a ton of drilling into that specific elements yet. It's interesting. People also expressed desires around web-based calendars. They liked web-based calendars because they were ubiquitous. You can get to them anywhere, and they liked that sort of consolidation factor, but they didn't feel like it was useful enough for that the current functionality of most web-based calendars was that much better than paper to make it worth it for them to bother to adopt one. So they didn't tend to want to use web-based ones. They were more likely to be kind of leaning towards Outlook, especially if they worked and they wanted to have something that was consistent with their work experience and whichever. But they were interested in technology. They wanted to use technology, but they didn't really feel like there was a great tool in place for them to use for their family. When asked about using Outlook for their homes, people tended to say it feels too business-ish. It feels too cold, and it doesn't have the kind of flexibility I need for my family, and it doesn't support really good integration of multiple people's calendars. So that was their kind of feedback in general about Outlook. On the kind of extra point to this being that a couple of the families that I spoke to in both this study and the previous one that I did were people working out of their homes. And even those people tended to feel like Outlook, they were more likely to use Outlook, but they still tended to feel like it was not flexible enough for what they wanted to be doing, that it was too only time-based, that it didn't have enough other tools in place for keeping track of what they wanted to be doing that made it that really attractive to them. So they weren't really super inclined to use Outlook, even if they were a home-based business. The last bullet point that I have here is that people, even people when we were talking about technology thing, there tended to be some people who were like, I don't like technology, I'm worried about it. But even those people, they didn't tend to include cell phones in their definition of technology. When I was talking when I'd ask them, do you have a cell phone? Oh yeah. It wasn't like they really even included a cell phone as a piece of technology. That was just a cell phone. It's different. And so it was interesting to see that they were not resistant to that. Their husband or spouse or whoever had to force their use of the computer on them. But hey, cell phone, nah, that's not technology-ish enough to them. And it was interesting to see the way that they kind of grouped that type of device that way. Personal expression was very important. Here's the part about handwriting was very important. A lot of people doodle on their calendars as well. They tend to put personal information into their kind of calendaring kinds of things. Like again, one mom has a list of cute things her kids say, and they tend to have kind of personal information embedded into the whole system as well. And we're running out of time, so I'm just going to cruise through that. And unless anybody has any specific questions about that. Oh, probably the most interesting thing on this other slide as well is that the graphics on the calendar were sort of important, but not really important. It kind of varied from person to person. Only one family had a calendar that they made themselves with their own graphics on it, and they expressed it as something they really liked about it. But they also didn't actually use their calendar a whole lot, so it's interesting. Several other family members, said, yeah, whatever, as long as the picture's not offensive, I don't really care. What I care about my calendar is the size of the squares and how big it hangs on my wall and whatever. And some people had several dead calendars on their wall because they happened to like that picture, but they didn't actually use the calendar. Like the pages weren't getting flipped, it still said May when we were there in July and whatever. So sometimes calendars were just there for ornamentation, but that wasn't necessarily what was useful to them. If they're using a calendar, it's because of the squares, because of the actual format of what they were doing, not because of the ornamentation of it. And we're about out of time, but we'll post these slides, and there's a link to the public link to the Ohana website, which is not necessarily as current as it could be, but there's some certainly information there, and you can contact me or Don Williams about the user research for this, and I'll be all around. Yes?
What was to you the most surprising thing that you saw? Either calendar related or sort of family management related?
I was really surprised at the way that the family dynamic had such a big impact. I hadn't really expected that there was going to be so many calendars all over the house. I really, I expected that people would have some sort of way of sharing things more consistently and being kind of more on top of that whole dynamic. But it was really unexpected to me that people hadn't managed to get a good way to address that problem yet. So I think there's a big need there.
I think you said earlier that usually it's the mom that drives the calendar.
The wall calendar, yeah.
Like how dominant is that? Like if there were an Ohana application, like how should there be, would you recommend after thought making it female friendly specific?
No, because again, there's different calendars in different places. The mothers did tend to be more likely, I can't give you a percentage based on the small sample we had, but the mothers did tend to be the ones who owned the kitchen calendar and were scheduling the doctor's appointments and whatever. But I wouldn't want to downplay the importance of the other stuff that the other family, that the parent or the other older kids were planning for themselves. So I think the way for Ohana to be successful is to appeal to everybody in the family, not just the one person. It seems like people have a lot of ownership of my own time and my own way of doing things, and I don't want to give it up to this other system to do it for me. And I'm not going to don't want to have to tell mom every time I want to schedule something. So no, I think we really need to be broad about the whole family about it.
Do you ever see like a calendaring revolving around family resources, like 3 kids and 2 cars?
I specifically asked all the families about that. With the sample we happened to have didn't have challenges with that. So, no.
And we had 20 families this summer for a different study. We saw that only in one family, and that family was run like a small business because of 6 kids.
Right.
And the mom was like, and I've got 4 staff people, I've got my husband, and I've got my... She felt like it was very, very she wanted the, like, where's the van?
Right.
You know, but that was like far, far, far deviations from the other 19.
Yeah. I mean, I expect that certainly could be something that would happen, but that didn't happen to be an issue for me. Yeah.
One thing around brainstorm past year that I came up with while listening, which is if you had a paper calendar, but you could, when you took a picture of it with your digital camera, there was some way to automatically, okay, AJ's smiling, so it sounds like this is an old idea.
No, I want to hear your version of
So you take a picture with your digital camera, and it's a special calendar that has like, some big blocks on it that are easily recognized with software. And so now when you're downloading all your pictures, we say, oh wait, there's that one's picture of the calendar, and we do something special with it, like it gets synced to everybody or whatever. And so no special hardware, just a calendar with some that's recognizable.
I think, there's a number of challenges with that being the back and forth sort of elements around that, and the team has kind of done some thinking on this particular area about, scanning and printing and the whole kind of integration of having calendars going from paper to electronic sort of thing. I think there's a number of challenges around the number of steps involved in doing that. If there's too many steps involved in getting my paper calendar onto technology, then pretty soon the technology starts losing its value.
Yep.
Why would I bother? I'm just going to stick with my paper calendar.
One step, like you take a picture, and the next time you download your pictures, everything happens automatically.
Yeah, but it's also the currency aspect about how up to date it is. I mean, one of the real values of having technology is that it's current, it's up to date, it's always synced across the different locations and whichever. So
Richard Banks, who is a designer in Windows, has built out a really nice flash demo of this, the cell phone camera, that I can send you a link to. But I think for the family, it seems like it may appeal to people who just need that reference when they're away or whatever. I think for the family, I really kind of agree with what Kathy's saying based on other research, and also the sense that then you can input into it. There you see it. But it would, for potentially very low cost, give you the remote, at least viewing of your calendar.
Yeah.
I worry
you
that
can imagine,
the day that I wanted it is the day I forgot to take the picture. But
well, and there's also versioning issues around, which version is most.
We can solve the versioning issue. It's all figuring out, breaking it up into pieces so that when your Outlook calendar uses a specific day, right, that would locate on that. Right, versioning is easy because we know what was the last picture of any given day, so we can always version it correctly.
Yeah, well, I guess the team has spent a lot of time too thinking about printing those, printing calendars and whichever, and having people keep track of which once I printed this, do I have to remember to throw away the new one? The old one once I get the new one, and I forgot to throw it away. And this is the one I had in my car, and is this one the more up to date than the one in my kitchen? And did I print that before or after I made that change? I don't remember. And it starts becoming challenging around managing all that kind of stuff. But I mean, I think there's certainly possibilities. Maybe especially I think in a shared calendar, doing that kind of interaction is a little bit more challenging as well, though, but I don't know. I think there's certainly possible ways of brainstorming around that, but I'm a little bit skeptical about it right now at this particular moment.
I would think that the natural type solution would be the kind of thing where it's a wall calendar that hangs, and then literally kids can go up and say, click on Adam, or click on Ryan, or click on Laura, or click on Roger, and then it spits out today, and that's all I have to take with me because that's all I really care about for the month. And, but kids are the ones who are going to rely on those paper ones far more than adults are, and then they reach the transition stage where they're not going to want to share their calendar because it's their business. They get 14, 15 years old, and the whole usage dynamic changes, I'm sure. So it becomes a usability challenge to figure out how to work with that shifting dynamic.
Yeah.
Also, the whole question of, okay, so I use Outlook at work, my wife uses Entourage, which is the Mac version of Outlook at home, and that's how we stay synced, and that's how we keep our family together. The kids don't even look. They just say, what do I need to do? Where am I supposed to be?
Yeah.
And we would love to have them be able to do that on their own, but it really requires a device for them to access this without parental intervention.
Yeah. And I mean, as far as the kids go, it seems like, when the kids are really young, there's just not a lot of interaction. It isn't until they start getting to be, at least school age, probably middle elementary schoolish age before, because up till that time, it's really the parents scheduling. And I'm scheduling how much time, whether or not I can take them to that event or not, and what I want them to be interested in. I want to foster this interest in chess, so I'm signing them up for the chess club, and that kind of thing. It's more parent-owned. But as the kids get older, then they start having more and more influence of the dynamic, and they should. And so it's really, Ohana is actually targeting school age and above children. So.
Start to actually care about where they are when. And
Yeah, and it kind of varies from case to case and whichever. And it's interesting because in some ways, both working parents or single working parent is more likely to become independent with the kids at a younger age. The kids have to become much more unique at a younger age. So then there's a number of different things that kind of feed into that dynamic. But yeah, definitely in the older kids sort of a range. But having parents be able to schedule their kids' time and just view what is Susie doing today, or how I want to be able to see Susie's time density, for my 3-year-old daughter, and I want to be able to see what she's doing kind of as an independent thing, though, too. So, having the different views on things.
Did you?
How much satisfaction did you hear? Is there a real demand for this, or is there just sort of well, it'd be nice if I could do this?
Well, it's interesting. When I was talking to families about this, first of all, I just asked them to describe what they were doing. At that point, again, the person who expressed the most pain was the non-dominant partner, and they were more likely to express pain with the system when I was initially discussing with it. But then as I went and talked to them more and more about it, and the last question I had for them was describe an ideal system. If you were going to describe an ideal system around this, people would get really excited about it. People were really passionate about, oh wow, this would be really cool, and I could do this, and this would be great. So by the time they had, they didn't express necessarily, especially the primary partner didn't necessarily express a lot of real dissatisfaction. But once they started kind of exploring, wow, but I could do this, and that would be really neat, and they got really energized and excited about it, and they were really positive. In the first study that I did, in the second set of visits with the families, I took out Ohana demos and whichever, and they were like topping out the chart for how much they wanted to buy one. I want one. I would pay $500 for this. I would, when are you going to come out with it right now? In 2 years is too long. I want to go get one. Can I keep this? And whatever. Even though they weren't functional, whatever, they loved it. So again, it was, and when they initially expressed it, it's kind of one of those really latent needs in that they weren't necessarily verbally expressing a lot of pain around it. But I think people have kind of gotten used to that sort of drudgery around, that's just the way calendaring is. And once they kind of started thinking about new possible ways of doing it, they started getting much more excited about it and becoming much more interested. So it's not something that's likely to pop out on a general, what kind of products do you need survey, but I think it's really got a lot of opportunity in the long run once people can see what it can do. So.
Will you be posting this to the Ohana website, this deck?
Yes. Let me do that. For the public site. We have the public site and the team site. It's hard. All those wording kinds of things too is which one is where, but yes, I will post it out there. Okay. Great. Thank you.
All right, and I'm looking at early November for the next one, so if you have any burning hot topics, it'll probably be competitors phase 2. Chandler is the burning hot topic, but I was wondering if you wanted something else with Chandler, like I'm not sure.
Well, I haven't seen yet.
Yeah, that was what I was going to ask the list, actually.
Well, Sean had emailed a couple.
He just emailed a couple, yeah.
You know what? So Lotus Notes is like release, going through their release cycles.
Interesting. Okay.
And I know someone who will go offline on that.
Okay.